We're going to talk today about the beginning of the Industrial Revolution and why it happens, where it happens, and why it happens, when it happens, and then we're going to start getting into the impacts of this Industrial Revolution. As we've gone through this study of AP World History, we know that we've mentioned a handful of monumental events in world history that change everything that happens afterwards, okay? So these massive changes in history that you guys have to have in your memory banks when you walk into your AP exam to recognize if you get a sweep of years that encompasses this change, things are going to be dramatically different after it than they were before it, all right? What are some of, besides now this Industrial Revolution that we're going to talk about today, what are some of these other major earth-shattering changes that need to be acknowledged in any continuity and change over time question that you might come across? Yeah? Very good. The first and the biggest is the Neolithic Revolution, that agricultural revolution when we started to farm rather than hunt and gather. Yes?
Fall of Rome.
The fall of Rome, particularly for Western Europe, certainly not as big as the Neolithic Revolution, but for Western European history, pretty big. Yes? Okay, very good. Again, European history focused, but a split in the Christian church from Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic. Yes?
The development of Islam.
Very good. The birth of Islam in the 7th century. That is massive. Jacob in the back. The discovery of the Americas. Very good. And the beginning of the Columbian Exchange. Awesome. The Industrial Revolution is as big as all of those, bigger than all of those, except for maybe the Neolithic Revolution that started off the civilizations in the first place. The Industrial Revolution is huge. You want a year for the Industrial Revolution? It's hard. It's not like the Neolithic. It's kind of like the Neolithic Revolution in the sense that it was an evolution over time. But it's much more focused than the Neolithic Revolution on certain periods of time. And we can talk about around the year 1750 to give us a nice roundabout year for the advent of the Industrial Revolution in England. It starts in England, and we're going to talk about now why. Why 1750? Why England? First, location, location, location. Western Europe's location on the Atlantic Ocean, England's literal location as an island within the Atlantic Ocean are huge for the development of Western Europe, and particularly England, as the start of the Industrial Revolution. Being on the Atlantic Ocean gives you access to ports, and gives you easier access to overseas markets, which will do two things for you, as we'll talk about today. It will give you the raw materials that are going to be needed to drive the Industrial Revolution, and they will give you access to markets where you can sell the goods that you produce. So first things first, England will like to pat themselves on the back for being the creators of the Industrial Revolution. And yeah, sure, pat them on the back a little bit. But there are things that they've got inherent advantages that other places don't have. For example, Austria is not going to be the birth of the Industrial Revolution because they don't have the same kind of access to foreign goods that England is going to have. All right? So geography has blessed England to be the heart of the Industrial Revolution. And it's not just being on the Atlantic Ocean. We're going to go even further from there. They've got an abundance of rivers in England. Obviously, England as an island is not very big. Never when you're on the British Isles are you that far from the ocean. But then there's an abundance of rivers within England that will help you get your wares to port cities on the ocean. But in addition to that, what benefit do rivers have in an industrial age, in a burgeoning and a growing industrial age? Yes?
Wait, can't you put your,
I know what you're talking about. Yes?
Can't you, bring it inland, for
You can start getting stuff inland, but we are going to have a little bit of a hard time early on. Rivers flow in one direction, thanks to Isaac Newton, right? So rivers flow in one direction. They flow out to sea. They go downhill. So we have a hard time getting upstream too easily until we have the development later in the Industrial Revolution of a steam engine. But So yeah, the rivers help you get your goods to port city so you can send them further out. Yes?
Mills.
Mills, go, more?
You know the mills, they have those things that are powered by flowing water. That
Very
spins
good.
Stuff.
Very good. You guys ever been to Yates Cider Mill? You can see there's a little, and that's a little rinky-dink offshoot that they've dug of the Clinton River that powers that mill at the cider mill there, right? And you guys have all probably seen that. So water power will power the earliest industrialized factories. And having a lot of viable rivers that you can use in England is going to help out with that. And then, of course, the transportation on these rivers. It's essential before the railroads come along. You got to be on a river, not just for the power, but to get your produced goods to market more easily. England is also blessed. England is also blessed by having natural coal and iron deposits and abundant timber, at least early on until they chop it all down. They've got iron and coal are going to be, well, coal in particular, is going to fuel the Industrial Revolution. Now, we like to think of steam engines in the Industrial Revolution, but remember, where does the steam come from?
Rivers.
Not really. I mean, the water comes from rivers. Very good. Steam engines are work because steam, which comes from boiling water, which comes from firing coal and heating up the water, eventually turns turbines and creates power for us. You need the coal to do all that. So these earliest factories, once we started to harness fossil fuels like coal and later oil, that's where the fuel is going to come. But for England, they've got the coal. They've got plenty of coal in England, at least early on. So Britain, yeah, you're special. You did a good job, but you were blessed by geography. You've got a lot of great rivers, and you've got ample coal and iron deposits. All right? Then we've also got to talk about European demographics. Demography, guys, is the study of human populations. And what have we already talked about with regard to human populations in the aftermath of the Columbian Exchange?
It went up.
Western European populations are going to dramatically increase. We're going to import new crops, like the potato, which is a really hardy crop. It can grow in many different places, and it's relatively easy and cheap to grow. And that is going to lead to a population boom in Western Europe. So Western European population increases. These people are going to be looking for jobs. They're going to flood to urban areas. And factories and an industrial production requires large populations in relatively small places. All right? So the growth of Western European cities or English cities is going to be an important factor in the development of their industrialization. You're also going to have in Western Europe the growth, and you guys probably saw this word if you already have read, if you've already done your reading for Karl Marx at least, you've read or seen the word bourgeois. And yes, ma'am. You know what it means? What does it mean? Very good. Excellent. Now, Karl Marx kind of paints bourgeois as a bad word, all right? Karl Marx in the Communist Manifesto, he's going to talk about the bourgeois owning class and the proletariat working class. And the ownership class dominates and oppresses the working class. We'll talk about that more in a couple days. But the word bourgeois is just a French word, all right? The German word for the same idea is burger. Someone who, like, not a hamburger, but someone who, like, is from the city, from the town. Oh, that's you! How about that? Yeah, so there you go. Your family once lived in a German city, probably, right?
I don't know.
Okay, I bet they did. You look into it.
I mean,
So,
burger in Germany means citizen.
yeah. someone who lives originally, before we had notions of citizenship of a state, it just meant you lived in the city. So anyway, Western Europe had a vibrant bourgeois class. And this comes out of the Middle Ages in Western Europe, and we've already talked about this. As cities began to grow in size and stature in the Middle Ages, people had already moved off farms. They started, maybe craftsman guilds. They started an early banking industry. Their wealth might have been created based on their skill or their entry into new business endeavors that never existed earlier in America or in world history. And now we have this growing bourgeois class. There's a group of people in Western European cities whose money is not tied to the land that they own and that's being worked, but it's tied to other things, and they've got cash in their pockets, and they can use that cash as investment capital. Oh, there's a word. Capital. Like capitalism. You guys are reading Adam Smith. It's like he wrote the Bible of modern capitalism, right? Capital is an economics term. You guys should have hopefully picked it up last year. Capital is anything that can be used to produce more wealth. All right? You guys hear this on the news when people talk about someone getting a capital investment. One person or a bank giving money to another person or a company in order to grow that company so that investment value actually grows and you make a positive return on your investment. All right? Think about during the industrial age. Think about the different businesses that you guys could start and run, or the businesses that would have existed, for example, back in the Middle Ages when we have the birth of the original bourgeois class. There might have been, and these are people's last names, right? There might have been a shoemaker. There might have been a cobbler. He's the shoemaker, I guess. There might have been a cooper. What did the coopers do?
Barrels.
They made barrels, right? There's all those smiths who are the blacksmiths of the community, right? And so whatever these people did, they became expressly skilled at their trade, whatever their trade happened to be, right? And the cobbler, the guy that made the shoes, he was cutting the leather, right? He was nailing the leather upper to whatever the bottom of the shoe was made of, because I'm not a cobbler, I don't know, all right? He was lacing them up and doing whatever else shoes need to have done to them to become shoes, all right? And it was a multi-step job, but the cobbler took care of it. You needed shoes, you went to the cobbler. Today, there are no more cobblers, right? There are people in mostly developing nations who have no clue how to make a shoe. They have no clue how to make a shoe. But they know how to put a rivet into a shoe, and they'll put rivets into the shoe. These are the little holes that your laces go through. They'll put rivets into your shoe 7 days a week, probably 10, 12 hours a day. They'll do the same monotonous job day in, day out, day in, day out, day in, day out. And then somebody else is going to be cutting the leather. And somebody else is going to be stitching. And somebody else is going to be doing the gluing. And eventually you've got a shoe. But nobody along that process knows how to make a shoe like the cobbler used to know, right? All of these new people are very specialized in what they're going to do, right? And they work in these factories where there's some kind of like assembly line production to make shoes. But guess what? If a cobbler back in the Middle Ages wants to cobble shoes, is that what he does? I don't know. If a cobbler wants to cobble, he's going to get himself some leather. He's going to get himself some wood. He's going to get himself some yarn, I don't know, string. I don't know how to make shoes. He's going to get himself all the stuff he needs to make shoes, and he's going to get scissors, and he's going to tinker, and he's going to put together a shoe. Right? And he does it all by himself. What kind of investment does he need to do that? Nothing. He needs scissors, he needs little hammers, he needs elves, because they help make the shoes, right? He needs the wood, but it's a relatively meager initial investment, right? It's just a guy one day saying, geez, I want to be a cobbler. And poof, he's a cobbler. Well, if the cobbler guild lets him in. But anyway, he becomes a cobbler. There's not a lot of investment. Where can he do his cobbling? I don't even know if that's a word. Where can he do that? He can do it at home. He can do it in like a room at his house. He can build a little shed out back. He can do it right at home. But with the Industrial Revolution, with the Industrial Revolution, we need big factories. And we need a lot of machinery. If we're going to make shoes in a factory, we got to have all this machinery that goes with it. And that's expensive. You can't wake up one day and go, "Ah, what am I going to do today? Going to start me a shoe factory." No, you need someone to like prime that pump. You need someone to say, "You, sir, have a good idea. I think you are going to be successful making shoes in your factory. I'm going to give you money. I'm going to give you capital with which to start this factory." All right? And then poof, you've got a factory. Well, you can't have that unless you've got available capital. And Western Europe and England had already an urban middle and upper middle class that had money in their pocket that they could invest, that they could give to others so these factories can be born. Good? Good. Yes, sir?
Isn't this the same idea with like the joint stock companies?
Yeah, in a way. Yeah, sure. Absolutely. That's where their investments come from. Eventually, we're going to talk about some societies that lack this bourgeois class that has like investment capital right in your own towns. Places like the Ottoman Empire and places like Russia. So those places, when they industrialize, and it's going to be much later, they're going to have to rely on foreign investment. They're going to have to rely on rich British people and rich French people to help them develop their own industry, help them invest in their own industry. I had a hand here, Tyler.
I was just asking because you were saying that the boyars aren't the boyars the same thing as the bourgeois though?
Yes, but those were like the landowning aristocrats, all right? Those were the landowning aristocrats. They didn't have, and they were fewer and further between, all right? When we talk about, like, most of history, the wealthy landowners, an infinitesimally small percentage of the population. With the Middle Ages in Western Europe, we get the development of a larger group of a wealthier urban middle class. There's far more of them to invest. All right. We press on. We're going to see increased agricultural productivity in Western Europe at this time and in England. Here's an etching of a farm in Scotland. And we've already talked about this. Remember the development of the three-field system, for example? What we're going to start to see in the Middle Ages, in the late Middle Ages, or what we call the High Middle Ages. If you ever hear that phrase, High Middle Ages or Late Middle Ages, they're the same thing. We see the development of a three-field system. We're using crop rotation techniques. So farms in Europe are going to become much bigger. And they're going to more efficiently use their land, not depleting the soil like they did in earlier ages. And it's going to lead to increased food production. Add to that the potato, right? Or other American crops like corn. Add to that these high-calorie, easy-to-grow staple crops being introduced to the old world. And you've got increased agricultural productivity. Throughout human history, really up until our most modern age right now. Throughout human history, increased agricultural production means increased populations. All right? If there's more food, you have more people. If you have more people, you produce more food, then you have more people. And increased populations at the same time as ever increasingly more efficient farms. Like when farms get more efficient, what do you need less of?
Workers.
You need less farmers. So now you got all these people like, I was going to be a farmer, but now there's no farm work for me, so what do I do?
Become a specialist.
You go to the city, and you look for work in a city. So cities and urban populations will dramatically increase with people looking for work. And these new factories that are going to be on the rise need labor. Yes?
Isn't that the urban families start to decrease though?
And then once your families move to the cities, you stop having quite as many kids. Absolutely. Absolutely, that is true. But the ball has already started rolling for increased populations. Remember, even though individual family sizes are going to be shrinking, you're going to have many more families. And as long as a mom is having more than 2.1 children, that society's population is going to grow. And they still, today our families are much smaller than they would have been in 19th century, 17th century Western Europe, or 18th century Western Europe. All right, excellent. Add another factor. Legal protections of private property. You guys remember what John Locke wanted to talk about? It wasn't John Locke, but we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and we're endowed with some rights. And among these rights are Life, liberty, and what did John Locke say? Property. Your property. In Western Europe, we've got out of the Enlightenment the idea that one's property is one's own. And it is theirs to own and do with as they see fit. And in England, more than any other place, those property rights are protected. Nobody can take your property without the due process of law. All right? And so as people have their own property, because remember, there's not a whole lot of property in places that have really like strong central kings. It's all the king's domain. But in England, we got a weakening king. Why in England do they have a weaker king than anywhere else?
Magna Carta.
1215, the signing of the Magna Carta and giving more power to those lords. That starts the ball rolling, right? England protects property rights. England has legal protection for property rights. They have contract law in England. Like if you sign a contract, you got to abide by that contract, or you could face a lawsuit. Some of the same things that are still a part of our legal system today. This existed in England before others. We've already mentioned it. Western Europe has got access to foreign resources. Western Europe has access to foreign resources via, don't worry about this picture, it doesn't fit with what I'm talking about. They have access to foreign resources via the transatlantic trade networks. They're connected to Western Africa. They're connected to the Americas, unlike Eastern Europe would ever be.
So you're saying they're connected to other places?
Yeah. And with those connections, Western Europe, and particularly England, is going to have access to capital investment, access to the resources needed to fund an industrial revolution like no other. All right? Guys, remember this. Remember Spain. Why is Spain when Spain really started the ball rolling? Because remember, who owned the silver mines of Potosi? Spain did. Who owned the silver mines of Potosi? Spain did. Who owned the silver mines of Potosi?
Spain.
When you say Spain, what do you mean? Like all the Spanish people? The king. The king owned it. The king reaped those benefits. The king spread the wealth out as he saw fit. How did England make their money in this overseas trade?
Raw materials, selling the finished goods to the...
But who owned it? Yes. Say it. It was from the colonies, but who ran the business? These joint stock companies. The British East India Company. In the Netherlands, the Dutch East India Company, right? The British West India Company. All of these companies that were created. The Virginia Company. You guys know these, right? Well, who got rich off of those? Was it the King of England? No, the king is only going to get money via tax payments. Who's getting rich off of those? The owners of the company. Who owns the company? Anybody that decided to invest. Who are the primary investors? This urban bourgeois class that's got money to invest. Guys, do you see why Spain ends up being, sorry Spaniards, largely insignificant on a global market? And today it is considered one of the pigs of Europe. Portugal, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. These countries with economies that are on the verge of collapse. While England became England. All right? It's huge. Okay, good. We press on. Everybody good? Good. All right. Also during the Industrial Revolution, because of and at the same time of all of these other things, we're going to have the development of new machinery. The development of new machinery that's going to be able to exploit these resources like coal and oil in ways that was never used before. We're going to be able to use coal to produce energy in ways that humans were never able to use before, more efficiently than ever before. We're going to realize that there's a lot of energy stored up in these old dinosaurs that we dig up, whether it be coal or oil, those fossil fuels. And as we begin to harness the power of coal, and as we begin to develop steam engines, and here's a schematic of the original Watt steam engine, W-A-T-T, the original steam engine. As we begin to harness this power, guess what you don't need to do with your factories anymore? Where do they... Oh, no, they still need to hire a lot of people. Where do they not need to be located anymore? They don't need to be on the river. Because, guys, space on rivers to set up your mill is a finite thing, right? there's only so much riverbank that you have. And once the factories are occupying all the riverbanks, you're kind of stuck until this comes along. Until we start to use coal to boil water, to create steam, to turn an engine. Then we can start moving those factories away, a little bit, not really far from the rivers, they're still in major cities, but we can start moving them away, and we start to see images like this sprout up through Western Europe. This is actually from Germany, where you can see factories abound. Factories are all over the place, and they don't all need to be located on a river. And what is coming out of all of those stacks? What's coming out of all of those chimney stacks?
Pollution.
Absolutely. You would not have wanted to breathe in Western Europe in the 1800s or the late 1700s. That's burning coal. That is coal being burned, being put up in the atmosphere with no modern scrubbers or anything like this. We were a dirty, dirty people back in this time. Good? Good. So the steam engine's huge. Eventually, we're going to develop an internal combustion engine using gasoline, for example. And this will be developed during something we're going to call the Second Industrial Revolution. We'll get to there in a little bit. And by the late 1800s, we will harness electric power. And with the harnessing of electric power, now you're not as reliant in your company on the coal. Obviously, a coal-producing power plant is. But you can move your factories even further from where they once were. Good? Good. We develop a factory system that is going to be producing the wares of the Industrial Revolution, where the entire production process can take place under one roof. Now, yes, the cobbler used to make his shoes under one roof, and he did it all by himself. But the factory process brings in specialization, where each one of these people, and this is a textile factory, these women are making cloth, each one of these women has a specialized job. Each one of those women may not know how to make a shirt, but they know how to make the cloth, all right? And that's their job, day in, day out, day in, day out, which is important to another aspect of the story, which we'll get to a little bit later in world history. Because guess what? When shoes were made by cobblers, who was really important in town? The cobbler. When shoes begin to be made in factories like this shoemaker, or this shoemaker, or this shoemaker, or this shoemaker, they become replaceable, right? Because this person really doesn't know how to make shoes. She knows how to make one little aspect of a shoe. And she can be pretty easily replaced if she starts to gripe too much about how rough her working conditions are. That's a story to come for a later date. So these workers were low skilled. You didn't need to know how to do much. And they did the same repetitive action day in, day out, day in, day out. Also, one other thing about the factory system, the sun, especially by the late 1800s, the sun will no longer dictate the workday. In agricultural societies, you worked by the sun. In industrial societies, the clock doesn't matter anymore. The sun doesn't matter. Factories can operate 24/7. And they still do to this day. I've got friends that work midnight shifts in factories. It still happens. Anybody? Yes?
Is this the same thing as division of labor? Or
This is the division of labor, the specialization of labor. Yes, you read about this in Adam Smith. Good? All right. The Industrial Revolution will spread. The Industrial Revolution will spread. It starts in England for the reasons that we already talked about. And then, shockingly, it spreads to the places that are initially closest to England and out from there. So it's going to start in England, then make its way across the English Channel into Belgium and France, and then further into Germany, and eventually it's going to trickle on into Eastern Europe. But it starts in Britain and spreads from there. It will also make it to the United States, and you guys studied this last year. The United States lags a little bit in terms of the Industrial Revolution. Like, what does the United States not have that England had in the 1700s? Big populations and investment capital, the money to do all this stuff. They were new. Remember, it was a lot of poor folks that were moving from Europe to go to the Americas. So the United States kind of lagged behind a lot of this industrialization. And then we had a little bit of a war in the mid-1800s, the American Civil War, right, in the 1860s. But after the American Civil War, after our country became more politically stable, we went on warp speed to industrialize, and then we eventually took over England. Yes?
I don't understand how we weren't able to get the population to do, if we had to do like the labor for us, if we had like slaves still at that before 65. Why didn't we use slave for like the division of labor?
Why didn't we use slaves in factory labor? That is a good question. In some cases, I think there were some use of slaves in northern factories. That's going to require me to think a little bit more to give you a good answer. But I think we're going to have connections with, like, much of the labor was being done in the North by, like, very low-paid workers. How would they have felt about slaves coming in and taking their jobs? They wouldn't have liked it very much. It would have been probably seriously problematic. Whereas the plantation economies, from the start, they were using slave labor. So as the economy develops in the Americas, as the industrial economy develops in the United States, we're going to have industrial workers, white industrial workers in the North, free labor, doing a lot of that work, who would never choose to be displaced. And ultimately, even as early as the late 1700s, it becomes those northern city dwellers that become the chief opponents of slavery in the United States. They become the biggest abolitionist group in northern industrial areas. Okay, we press on. In the late 1800s, we come to the Second Industrial Revolution. This is where we get advanced. You guys might not have learned about this one before. There's a Second Industrial Revolution. Beginning in the late 1800s, mid-1800s, all the way up until about World War I, the Second Industrial Revolution, where we will perfect steel production. This is really the most important aspect to the beginning of the Second Industrial Revolution. We will make better steel. Steel is made from iron, and the more pure you can make the steel, the more impurities you can get out of the iron, the stronger the steel. And in the mid-1800s, a guy named Henry Bessemer in England develops a process that takes his name, known as the Bessemer Process. We don't need to get into the weeds of the science of this, but that better extracts the impurities from the iron, making better steel, making steel more efficiently than it had been done before, and making steel stronger. And this is going to be huge on two fronts in the Industrial Revolution. Take a look at this. It's a map of Europe. These faint green lines represent railroads in Europe by the mid-1800s, by 1850. The red lines are railroads in Europe by 1890. And so with the advent of the Bessemer process and more efficient steel production taking hold across Europe, we're going to see railroads dramatically increase. Remember, now with railroads, you can build more factories even further from these rivers that you once relied on. So that's going to be important. The other thing you can do with better steel is you can start building up. Because in these urban areas, land can sometimes be at a commodity. Land is at a premium. And in the late 1800s, instead of building out, we start to build up, and we start to build the first skyscrapers. This is one of the first in Chicago, Illinois. Chicago is really the birthplace of the global skyscraper. So we start to build up. Now, you would probably think of skyscrapers as being a lot of offices and such, but skyscrapers also serve purposes as being factory houses. And you guys probably learned last year about a story called the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire in New York City. So please know that these skyscrapers were absolutely used for factory production as well, even though the conditions were horrid. The Second Industrial Revolution is also a revolution in the use of chemicals and working with chemicals. Those of you that are kind of into chemistry. Wait, you all have a chemistry class right now, right? Yeah. So when you start talking about the birth of the periodic table of elements and things like this, and the Nobel Prize, Alfred Nobel was doing his work, and Dmitri Mendeleev was doing his work in what we now know as the Second Industrial Revolution. So a greater understanding of the chemical nature of the world around us and being able to exploit those. One of the most important chemists who also is a part of this Second Industrial Revolution is a guy named Fritz Haber, or Haber. You guys familiar with him?
The Haber Process?
Yeah, very good. The Haber Process, which fixes nitrogen. I don't even know what that means, but that's why I don't teach chemistry. But what does it mean for the planet? Fertilizer for our fields, which means more food, which means more production, our people, which means more production in our industries, right? So the Haber Process, and it also results in blowing a lot of people up in the First World War, and ultimately creating other nasty gases that will kill a lot of people.
Wait, so what was his name?
Fritz Haber, H-A-B-E-R. The Second Industrial Revolution also electrifies the industrial world. We get now electric power. And now those factories that were staying open after the sun went down, but were being lit by dim candles and torches. You can imagine what that would be like inside. Now those factories can be electrically lit and stay lit 24/7.
That's gonna be your like quote.